Thank you, tech team. So Anne is not here today with us today, but she was instrumental in making this happen. And we also want to thank all the deans of the business schools and the executive directors of business schools in the higher education sector who helped shape today, nominate speakers, bring forward some questions and help shape the day or the next hour. So I want to thank them for that. Just a quick one, we are closing at 3 and you can have a recording of this that you may want to use for your staff, for your classes, or wherever else you are active. You may want to use that recording. It's on YouTube, it's publicly available, and you'll only see it tomorrow morning. It's only uploaded tonight. Just quickly, in terms of those people in the room who I recognize the names of as being here many, many times over there for the Engage. It's the second time we've got this format where we're interviewing people and having a conversational style. It's an unusual style for us, but next time we will go back to a kind of a presentation style. So I just thought I'd, say how we vary it as we go along. It's now my great pleasure to introduce to you our 2 speakers today, and speakers being in terms of a conversation. We've invited, thank you, as I said, to the deans for nominating these speakers and discussing it. We've got Cas Coovadia and Bongi Kunene with us, who will discuss with us and share with us their thoughts. You, of course, please can put in questions and comments into the chat so that they can answer those questions that you have. So please put direct questions to them or comments. Let me introduce Cas Coovadia first. He's the CEO of Business Unity South Africa since the 1st of April 2020, after retiring as Managing Director of the Banking Association of South Africa, that's BASA. He was instrumental in positioning BASA as one of the leading business organizations in South Africa and positioning it as a credible voice for the banking industry. Cas obtained his BCom from the University of College Durban in '71. He has contributed to numerous articles and publications and is very active in numerous business organizations and in civic life. He's a chairperson of National Business Initiative and on the council of Wits University and on the board of the Center for Development and Enterprise, amongst many other engagements. Our second speaker is Bongi Kunene, and Bongi is the Managing Director of Banking Association of South Africa. She assumed this position in March 2020. Prior to that, Bongi was the global head in the public sector banking for Standard Bank Group. She had responsibilities for strategic direction for business in 15 African countries, including South Africa. Her career has included a role as executive director at the World Bank Group in Washington, DC. And that capacity, she served on the board representing South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola. Bongi has also served in the South African government on different capacities, including, amongst others, as Chief of Staff in the Office of the Deputy President and the Head of Treasury and Economic Affairs for the Gauteng province. So it's my great pleasure. To start off welcoming you both. And I know our tech team, I want to thank our tech team for being on top of us today in terms of spotlighting. It's a bit of a to and fro with all the speakers. I want to start us off. Thank you for being with us. And I want to start us off with saying how we started the event today. We spoke about Barnes having tweeted that we need over 100 good people to make the country right. And we're not even going to go to 100. We're going to ask you about the top 10 it'll take to make it right. And I'd like you to think about over the next hour, if you had to pick 10, which 10 would you pick? But more specifically then, in terms of leaders and experts to make the country right. The country is crying out for leadership, and yet we worry, where have the experts and the leaders gone? Why are they not stepping up? I wonder if you can share with us your thoughts. Bongi, you muted, and Cas, you're going to have to both unmute. And you're welcome to do it at the same time.
So who are you directing this to?
Oh, whoever's got the best answer, just tell us where the leaders are.
Bongi, why don't you start?
Okay. So for me, it's not really a question of leaders have deserted us. It's about people in positions of leadership stepping up and doing what is expected out of them. So the leaders that we have, if we have a feeling that we are not being led, it actually is something of a mark against those that we consider to be leaders today. And I have to say that each era generates its own type of leaders. So for anyone who has a hunger for the Mandela days, that was nation building kind of leadership. And we passed that stage. It was passed on to a stage of creating correct fundamentals, consolidating South Africa's position among nations, and making sure that our professionalism in all spheres is something that one can celebrate. So the leaders that we have now, my own expectation is that we need to be more on the doing. The South African vision, the South African story is very well known. So it's about how well are we doing that which we have pledged to do for the country, for those who will come after us, and the ones we want to serve the best, which is the citizenry of South Africa. And of course, not forgetting that we are a nation in a family of nations, starting with Africa, the continent. We have to pick up speed and be accountable and transparent in our measures in what we are doing, both on a business side for South Africa in Africa, but also on the whole sphere of leadership. We want to be ethical and visibly so in doing that which we have pledged to do.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, Cas, if you want to share your thoughts, yeah?
Yeah, so I think it's an incorrect postulation that leaders and experts have abandoned the country. If you look at what happened during COVID, at the height of the pandemic in 2020, we had close to 400 experts, professionals in health, in behavioral sciences, in transport, in communication, in project management, legal people, working pro bono for almost a year with other stakeholders and supporting government to manage the pandemic. Last year, we had close on to 50 people working pro bono, helping government roll out the vaccines and manage that process. So I think it's an incorrect postulation to say that experts and professionals and leaders have abandoned the country. I think that there is a strong will amongst leadership to work in the national interest. Certainly amongst business people, I mean, I see, this is what I spend my every day on, is to try and convince government to be receptive to business expertise, working with government to implement, as Bongi says, that's a critical challenge, to implement critical issues that need to be implemented to change people's lives in this country. I think that leaders are there. I think that experts, professionals are there, and they putting their weight behind the wheel, and will continue to do so. But I think that we need to use those far more effectively than we are using currently as a country.
Yeah, I love also when Bongi, when earlier on you said it's about being visibly so doing the ethical thing. So we must do it in a way that it is seen by others, and it must be effective, and it has to do with the action rather than just the leadership part. I'm glad you're both so hopeful about leaders being here and the experts. It sometimes, perhaps for the deans who put these questions together, sometimes feels we, drifting in a leaderless boat. But that's maybe just on the side. Can I ask you, in fact, see who wants to address your thoughts on the recent announcement to make the constitutional changes to the mandate of the South African Reserve Bank? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, that's just sort of, do you have any thoughts of that? And let me ask you, so what are the implications of that for our business schools? Are there any implications? Bongi, you're muted. You're muted again.
All right. I'm not muted, right?
No, that's perfect. Yeah.
So, okay. I'll start by saying, obviously, a constitutional change is a very tall order. And before you change the constitution, I would beg you to reflect. In the period up to 96, CODESA and the creation of the constitution, and it came out in 96, what was behind the thoughts of those who were the constitutional drafters when they wanted the independence of the central bank to be enshrined, not just in law, but in the constitution? So if you want to change it, what has changed between 96 and now? And of course, not being a constitutional expert, I would want to say the issues about the Reserve Bank range, the first and foremost is the mandate, and then the way it does its business. It's situated in the Twin Peaks model of regulation. There is already a lot of coordination between the Reserve Bank and state entities that are responsible for the economy. So if you want to change its mandate and change the constitution, what are you solving? Are you solving for financial sector regulation? Are you forgetting that we have this Financial System Council of regulators that has sufficient authority to talk about economic policies right across the country together with the Reserve Bank? It's not the Reserve Bank alone that does that. And of course, you do have inside the law, in the Financial Sector Regulation Act, it provides for a financial sector interministerial council. So you've got a political system that has got systems and processes of engaging with the Reserve Bank on a regular basis. So what would be new with the changes? Expanding the mandate to go beyond what it does right now. Do you think that it will do better if it's got an expanded mandate? And is it created for that expanded mandate? Or will you then say we also need new people? And as it stands, we've got to be very frank and say part of the beauty of having the Reserve Bank as is that it's got a public shareholding which ensures a lot of transparency and accountability. Just last week, when it had its annual meeting, anyone who had followed those debates would know that there is extensive questioning of the mandate and how it is carried out. So I wouldn't be among the first who say expand the mandate, because it's doing really well in what it is been tasked to do at the moment.
Thanks so much, Cas. Any thoughts you want to add?
Just a little bit. I think Bongi's covered it all, but just to say, so the governor of the Reserve Bank was at the Business Leadership South Africa Council a couple of weeks ago, just to speak to the council. And one of the things he said is that a problem in South Africa is that we have this habit of breaking what works. And I think that the Reserve Bank works. And it has done a very, very good job in meeting its mandate, which is to control inflation. We know what happens when inflation goes out of control, and the Reserve Bank has done an excellent job at that. I was in fact speaking to a fund manager based in London just 2 days ago, and he was unequivocal. He said that the South African Reserve Bank stands up amongst its peers in the way it actually meets its mandate, international, not just in emerging countries, but even in developed countries. So I think that we need to separate the wheat from the chaff here. I think that some of this is political. Reserve Bank cannot create jobs. Jobs are created if you create an environment for investment and we grow our economy. That's how jobs are created. So yeah, we certainly have come out quite clearly opposing any changes to the mandate of the Reserve Bank. And in fact, on the contrary, we should be shouting from the rooftops at the good job they are doing in maintaining the mandate.
Thanks for that. It's good to hear that. Some of that's come through in the discussions at SAPSA as well. Can I move to the next question? I want to encourage people in the audience to please post questions. See if you want them to go into more detail or more depth. Please just post them in the chat. The question for a question came up about the recent changes in the permission to upload electricity. So we're going to move away a little bit from the bank to the electricity, which I think is also it's quite a critical shift. So we recently finally got the permission to generate our own electricity and feed back into the system. And this is more than just an overdue change that'll address some of the chaos around the load shedding, but it'll kind of shift the hegemonic kind of power from monopolies into the hands of perhaps citizens, into our own hands. Can you say a little bit more about that? On the one hand, just what does that mean? And then how do you feel about when these kinds of state functions, these public functions, are devolved into citizen, into a different format? Is there something you can say about that?
Yeah, so let me start on this one. We've been advocating a more open energy market in the country for quite a few years. We've always had a problem with Eskom's monopoly. And we've had a problem with government not creating an environment for private sector players to actually generate energy. Despite the successes of the independent, the renewables programs that we've had over the last few years, where programs, the whole renewables process has been managed by Treasury and managed very well and has drawn significant investment. So we welcome the moves by the president. Just to say that about 2 weeks or so before the president made the announcement, Busa publicly put on the table what we think the priority areas are. And we were glad to see that probably 80 to 90% of what we said was in the president's announcement. So removing the ceiling for embedded energy is absolutely correct. When President increased the ceiling to 100 megawatts, we believe the environment was created for private sector to get involved. And in a short period of time, we had about 25 to 30 projects authorized and starting to build after the president announced the 100 megawatts thing. So if you create the environment, the investment comes in. There's no two ways about it. And removing the ceiling is very good, we think. Enabling ordinary citizens, households to go solar and to sell excess energy into the grid is also the way to go. And it's all of those things combined that will, over a period of time, in the next 18 to 24 months, deal with our load shedding problem. We're not going to deal with our load shedding problem until all of that energy gets onto the grid. So we welcome this. We must also say that the current ESCOM management has been very supportive. I mean, Andre de Ruyter and his team have been absolutely clear that we can only solve our load shedding problem through renewables and cleaner energy. And that we need to get as much private sector energy onto the grid as possible, so that we can deal with our energy constraints. So we're very much in favor of this. We have indicated to government that we would want to work with them to implement the president's plan. And we've had a favorable response to that, and I'll be meeting with some people in the presidency to actually put together an implementation plan, and hopefully we can get moving on this.
That's fantastic. Bongi, do you want to add something?
Just one issue, not so much on the energy. For this country to be a success and to have a fair shot on the future, we really need all networked industries to work. And on the networked industries, the measure that the government has taken to liberalize to this extent in terms of energy, from the banking perspective, we've been ready, we've been supporting a lot the financing of alternative measures. So whether it's green finance or sustainability finance, all of that, we are in complete support. And that also includes our support for intense work on providing water. South Africa is a water scarce country. So water is a fundamental for the livelihood of South Africans. Also transport and logistics, ICT, of course, energy is part of that. And I would say we are very happy with the measures that the president has announced.
Thanks. Can I just ask quickly, and I don't have the detail of the policy and the statement in front of me. It says that private sectors can contribute into the system and upload. Does that also mean the parastatals like the universities? So they can also generate electricity? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
ESCOM has announced that it's going to be giving out land. I don't know the terms of giving out that land, but it's going to be giving out land to big entities. So mining companies, that could also include universities, because you are big landholders, so that when you generate energy, we are able to upload it into the grid.
I love, Bongi, that you say we are all great landholders. We universities, we feel very poor. We don't feel that way. But, you know, maybe there are some universities that are stashing away their land ownership. It's not quite that way.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, but I hear what you're saying. So, no, I hear what you're saying, that we're using land in a different way. Can I just ask you?
I'm just saying that ESCOM can give you even more land.
I'm hoping all the deans and people in Senate are listening to this. Bongi, you are being recorded. So we're going to take a, so just a quick one here. So electricity, we know, has been an absolute chaos, a national chaos, and has held us back enormously in terms of getting things done, even the basics done. And we're now looking at resolving this. Is fantastic. Are there any other areas, like these kinds of public functional areas, that you think we need to get right? Are there 2 or 3 that you can name and say, we must get it right? Apart from the other 20 we're thinking about, I'm saying the top 3.
Okay, I would start with digitization. Digital journeys, digital skills, digital everything. So whether it's ICT, whether it is even in the delivery of learning, because we are talking to universities here, I think we are on a digital journey as South Africa. But our knowledge says that maybe in the higher education system, you've got about 50,000 students who are on this journey. And the throughput after 4 years comes out to being 20,000. Yet the need for the country today, we have more than 60,000 vacancies that relate to digital skills. And for the country to be competitive, digital being the way to go, the gap between what is produced after 4 years and what we are standing at with 60,000 missing today, I would say it's a growing concern that if we don't do something, we would be left behind. But that's just one area. So, Cas, another?
Yeah, so I mean, we engage in government currently on some of these. So the one other big issue is logistics. Getting our ports right, getting our rail systems right, getting our roads right. Because our ports have actually fallen substantially, even when compared to other ports on the continent, as far as efficiency and competitiveness goes. And we believe that the private sector can play, with government, can play a critical role in that. Then we believe that, you know, we need to identify critical areas of infrastructure that will generate investment and growth, and that the private sector can invest in. And not, we shouldn't be identifying, you know, 50, 60 projects. We should be identifying 3 top projects and bringing those to market and investing in those, and that they make a significant difference. And then I think the third big one currently, and I mean, you know, I always lament at the fact that we read about this, we see it on TV and so on, and we just shrug, actually. And that's law and order. If you see what's been happening in the last few weeks in our country, you know, most reasonable governments would say we're in a state of serious emergency. And for the public and private sector to work together to actually build the capacity of our law and order agencies, our intelligence agencies, to actually do the work they're supposed to be doing, I think a critical issue, because this is also a critical issue for investor sentiment. And so I'd say those 3 are critical.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's, you know, over the last week again, the gender-based violence is at a level that, you know, reminds one of a civil war. There appears a war of, you know, within families, amongst neighbors and communities. The brutality is unspeakable. And one
Yeah.
worries that after every incident like that, there's repercussions of sorts that we now have to manage. So I do agree with you. It does feel like, you know, a civil war sometimes, or we have a state of emergency of sorts. And that brings us into the next question. It was Chabalala, the chief executive of Standard Bank, had said that, you know, that South Africa is being grey listed by the Financial Action Task Force in Paris, and it would be worse than a credit rating downgrade if we kick from that global financial system. What can we in higher education do about that? What can our business schools do about it?
Okay, it's a range of actions. So on one side, what we have to keep in mind is that banking is part of the international financial architecture. It's not about South Africa, South African laws, and it ends there. If you fall foul of that architecture, it means that apart from being in a corner, you are now going to be subjected to enhanced due diligence for anyone who's doing work with you. And they have to give extra reasons why they even want to consider investing in South Africa. And putting resources in a country that is grey listed would require those who are investing in us to have higher capital reserves, because in that system, in that architecture, what all the central banks are looking at, what those people who are setting the standards, whether it's Basel in Switzerland or it's these committees that sit in different spaces, including this cohort, which is called the Financial Action Task Force. By the way, South Africa is a member of FATF. Our membership in the G20 ensures that when the laws, the behaviors that are acceptable and not acceptable are being discussed, we are at that table. So being grey listed is not just an inconvenience. It goes to the extent of saying you were held at a high esteem and you've let yourself down in a number of actions that you should have been paying attention to. Therefore, your capital issues are going to be looked at differently. And as a country, you are no longer going to be an automatic destination for fresh capital. So when Sim Shabalala said those words, it really comes from all that knowledge.
And
Yeah.
can I just add to that on what I think universities could do? Because if we get grey listed, it has a significant impact on all institutions in this country, including universities. Because it has a negative impact on investment, it has a negative impact on funding that universities try to raise. It has a negative impact on our financial system, which is amongst the best in the world. And I think universities, one should be sort of unpacking what the impact of grey listing is, not just for the banking sector, but for the country, not just for the financial sector, because the financial sector itself does a lot of work unpacking that, but for the country. And be more vocal about this, be more vocal and say that we can't allow this to happen. Now, if you speak to the Reserve Bank will tell you they've done everything they need to do to try and avoid this grey listing. But what FATF will be looking at is what's government doing about corruption, for instance. All right, now that's not in the Reserve Bank sense, that's in government sense. And I think government needs to begin to appreciate the president, in fact, needs to begin to appreciate what the impact of a grey listing would be. And so I think for universities, because often people say, yeah, it's a financial sector because they only worried about themselves, or business only worried about themselves. Universities should begin to appreciate what the negative impact of this would be on them and the country, and begin to talk a bit more about this.
Maybe also, Cas, it's a question of who does the economic impact assessments. I would say for universities to say someone will do it, that would be stepping away from a challenge which is real. Because there are so many angles if you want to do an impact assessment that you want to look at. So for you as a sector, what would it mean for education? That is a subset of other economic impact assessments, because you want to know for the social sectors of our country, when you are suddenly outside of this sphere of influence, which allows you to get financial flows and investments, and allows other countries to use your stock exchange in a way that says they are deriving value from the African continent. What is it going to mean? To my knowledge, there isn't a university that's done that impact assessment, but of course, it's work that is forthcoming. We have to keep in mind that we are not grey listed yet. So if it does happen, that is one immediate role that I see for the universities.
So, thanks for that. I'm going to take a message from you to our CEO at USAF, Professor Ahmed Bawa, who would be, who's fantastic at pulling the sector together and perhaps generate a position paper that we do need to generate and say, what would that grey listing mean for our sector? It would be devastating for our sector. We're talking about, partnerships with overseas, funding overseas. There's a lot of research funding. So for our sector, of course, it would be devastating, as for all sectors, but the more voices we can bring forth, the better. Just another comment, Kopana Ratele is a researcher in our domain in higher education who spoke about corruption and said how somehow that kind of is an elephant in the room and we're not addressing it. We are the specialists. We should be not the specialists in corruption. I don't think he said that, but he said we should be researching corruption. What is going on in our space that we enable corruption to such an extent, and what is our culture kind of underpinning the corruption? Because of course it's more than just one corrupt person. It's a system that that seduces people. And yeah, I don't want to diminish the individual responsibility, but I'm saying there's a context to that. So we must research that a bit more.
Yeah.
There's two questions which we'll come to in a minute. Did you want to add something? No?
No, just to say that corruption is a real cancer in the system. And it is not the grand corruption that we should worry about. It's the corruption that enables you to get anything done. Whether it is about placing a student in a university, if someone greases the wheels of the placement system, that is corruption.
That's right.
And it goes to even our personal spaces. So it's the lens that we need to be looking at. There is obviously what Cas was talking about in terms of just the levels of crime and lawlessness. And if it is like that, it really does enable more corruption, even that of a less scale.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem we can pretend that it doesn't exist.
You're absolutely right. It comes at a small level. It's at, in fact, at every level. You're absolutely right. It's a context of that. I wanted to go to the next questions and then ask how the business schools, are the business schools doing enough? And I'm not fingering business schools, I'm doing it because that's our focus today. Of course, the other faculties too. But the business schools, are we equipping our graduates with the kinds of skills that we need to face these kinds of challenges out there? Are they fit for purpose? What are your thoughts on that?
You want to go first, Cas? Or
Okay, so, I mean, I can't answer that question with a no, whether universities are actually equipping up. Of course, they're equipping people, but I think we need to do much more. And I think we need to do much more because of the changing environment, because of how the business environment has changed, and what is important for business today. So it's no longer just the bottom line and shareholder value and dividends. Okay. It's about sustainable business, and sustainable in the broader sense, not only climate change issues and land issues and so on, important as those are, but sustainable in the sense that you do business more responsibly, you do business ethically, you look after your employees, you relate to the communities in which you're working, and so on. And I've just finished a book called Reimagining Capitalism by a lady by the name of Barbara Solomon, who heads up a Reimagining Capitalism unit at Harvard Business School. And it's extremely interesting. And she talks about how you can actually, within the context of capitalism, conduct your business in a way that is sustainable, in a way that actually looks after broader stakeholder values, ethics, and you can increase your bottom line over a period of time. So the two are complementary. And I think it's those sorts of stuff that business schools need to inculcate in leadership, over and above the stuff that you usually have in your MBA and the other technical stuff and so on. And so because I think that business leaders need to appreciate that the long-term sustainability of their businesses are intricately tied to the long-term sustainability of the countries in which they work. And I think it's those sorts of things that business schools need to start talking about.
So if I can add to that, Cas, not being part of a business school currently, so my interaction with the business schools is, with all graduate schools, is on getting the throughput from the universities. And I do know that when universities design their curricula, it's not designed for a job. I would say the biggest value I would derive as a user of a university system is to get people who are able to think. And the thinking part then demonstrate itself on problem solving and on all those other skills that are not about 1 + 1 = 2, but are they extra that comes out with the package of that person. So if I were to add what I think could be the next path, I think it's in the type of immersive learning that business schools need to do. Because if you are going out with your business degree or your MBA or anything, you should be able, not because you've done it through case studies, but you should be able to think outside of your industry and saying, if you were approached right now to join a state-owned company, where would you derive the solutions? Because we need to solve what's going on there. It's not going to be in how you were taught. It's going to be what you were taught, the networks that you have established, your ability to do deep dives on issues that are systemic And your ability to do your vertical and horizontal integration and project manage all of these things together as they are going on. And that's where the immersion that I'm talking about, which is going on in universities, in business schools, I think it can be done more systemically and with a very focused intent of opening up your students to live problems, such that when you throw them in the deep end, it's not the title that stands up, it's the ability of the person to think through a problem in that way.
So Bongi, I'm getting a lot of in the chat, a lot of agrees and a lot of applause. People saying that's exactly what's needed. We need, I mean, near saint geniuses that you describe, people that can do what you're talking about is immerse themselves into context and respond regardless of that context, but to be able to respond, you know, what you call horizontally and vertically.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, in our preliminary discussion 2 days ago, we already discussed how that context kind of is so important that if one doesn't understand that context, you know, it makes for a very poor skill. The skill is kind of like very, it won't really hit the ground. Yeah. I want to get to the questions in a second. The last question I want to ask you here is about the global market. There was a comment earlier a few days ago when we asked, there was a global market is opening up, and we know that there's an upsurge of business schools and executive programs right across the globe, including MBAs and doctorates of business and so forth. What do you think is our unique niche that we can offer the globe so that perhaps we don't drown or get drowned out in that sort of, you know, in that onslaught of international programs? How do we stay competitive? What's our unique contribution?
So the one feature of South African, if I could call it culture, is how well South Africans rise to an occasion. So it's not one thing. Cas mentioned the 400 business leaders who contributed in creating solutions around COVID. And because it was all multidisciplinary, it wasn't one sector. It was everybody, 400 people giving their time, their skill. I would say the South African thing where we are really good at when challenged and with extension, we rise to the occasion. So if you are able to write case studies of each of these stories, so what we did when we had to host 2010, the World Cup, what we've done just now with COVID, and there are many other South African stories of just rising to the occasion, and there is nothing like a force of good like South Africa anywhere in the world, because it's not about expertise, whether it is in the medical field, it's how we take that and sort of drag it across and use it to the advantage of our economy. Many, many of the South African innovations would fall into that category as well.
So if I could just add to that, I think one of the things we can offer is, and so I sit on the board, I'm a trustee of the Wits Business School, and repositioning ourselves within the context of the continent. And I think that what South African business schools can offer is what sort of skills and what sort of EQ and what sort of thinking do you need to actually leverage off the market that everybody agrees is on the continent. And I think South African business schools, South African university business schools can play a critical role in that, in conjunction with business schools in other parts of the continent. I think that we need to begin to build leaders, business leaders, that recognize what the opportunities are on the continent, but also recognize what the risks are, and what sort of cultural sort of thinking you need to do business responsibly and sustainably on the continent. So I think that our business schools have I think that's an advantage that they can use to bring people here to actually do business on the continent.
That's fantastic to hear that. And I know that there are people in the audience taking note of that. I want to quickly go over the chat and see if there are any questions and comments. There was a confirmation, of course, about electricity, that there is a danger, of course, of middlemen, that it somehow gets corrupted again, and we'd have to be watching out for that. So there's a comment there. We also want to, there was a comment about leadership being, that political leadership and our business leadership and our education leadership, that somehow they also at times are not seen to work together, and that there is a danger or a difficulty there. The tertiary education should focus on the training of current and next generation of political leaders, that we would, unfortunately, we don't have sort of entry exams for political leadership, perhaps that is sort of a, do the sort of benchmark test for political leadership. That might be an idea. There's a comment on including ethics and governance and responsible governance, responsible business leadership in the business schools. And you addressed that, you said that that is very important. And I'm going to go through, there was a lot of affirmation of what you were saying. And so I think it really echoes with what people in the room here are seeing. So I want to we've got 2 or 3 minutes before we close off, perhaps 6 minutes. I want to just see if there are any comments that you want to add, Bongi and Cas, and if you can think about those. I want to get back to the original question that we had. We said, if we have 100 good people, we can fix the country. And I want to start with 10. And you don't have to name all 10, but which, let's say 3, apart from, of course, you would take higher education, somebody from higher education, I'm sure, somebody from the business schools, I'll give you those. Who else would you pick? Give us 2 or 3 that you think we need that domain, or a person from that domain with that kind of thinking. Who would be the 3 you pick? On what criteria would you pick them?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you a name.
No, I'm glad not.
I would say to you that it's the skills.
That's right, yeah.
That I would go with.
Yeah.
So I would start with planning. You won't be able to execute anything if it hasn't been planned by real people whose job is systemic planning. And then I would say for every big idea, for it to be delivered, it needs project managers and different kind of project management, not one line, because it's where we fail. We are not failing because we didn't know what needs to be done. And this is very true for mega projects. We are failing because it's at the mezzanine level. It's not at the bottom, it's not at the top. It's at the mezzanine level where everything must hang together. And it's those project managers who are vertically tasked or horizontally tasked that will bring whatever you have on time with the scope, and they've used the money efficiently and effectively. And this would cut across for me. I don't care. I'm agnostic of the sector. I would say project managers right through. And then because we are human beings, there's never been a system of existence where you can say, where you can disprove that umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. I would then say, give us psychosocial support. So I want humanities from universities. I want people who are going to anchor behaviors that our society wants. I want to be able to live in an area where I can walk, play, raise children, do whatever. And that's going to come from our humanity, being human. So those are the three for me who are starters.
I love those. I love those. Cas?
Yeah, so I agree with Bongi. I also wouldn't want to name names because it's not a question of the names. It's a question of the skills and the capacity, and the commitment, and the appropriate culture. So we need people who have, so, you know, whenever I speak to my members and to business people, I speak to them within the context of not just what's in the interest of business, but what's in the national interest and how that enables business to promote itself. And so we need people who have the national interest at heart. I think Bongi's mentioned project managers, absolutely, planning, absolutely. I think that we need people who can pull our education system, right? Because that's an Achilles heel. And so we need people from universities, people with skills in restructuring our, particularly our basic education system and creating that base for children to actually grow and to develop. I think we need the skills in sorting out our entire criminal justice system, because these are the things that impact most on people. Parents want the kids to be educated, to go to proper education, to progress, to go to university. People want to be safe. People want to be able to walk in the streets. People want to be able to, you know, not every time you leave home wonder whether, or every time your daughter leaves home, whether she's going to come back safely. So I think it's some of those softer stuff that actually impact on ordinary people's lives every day. We can do all of the stuff that we talk to government about, logistics, infrastructure, the energy and all that, absolutely necessary. But let's bring in the sort of expertise and leadership that addresses issues that have a direct impact on people's lives.
I love what you're saying, because I was also in our provisional conversation 2 days ago. We spoke about the context. The universities will, of course, say we'd love to educate and, you know, do more. But if our students are going back hungry, going back to communities that are not safe, they use transport that's not functional, electricity is not working, the network's not working. It's these macro systems that we, you know, the universities can do as much as they can if the system around it is not functional. And I think that that is what we're finding in a lot of these environments. And what you're pointing out is quite right. We need people to get those systems right, so that the ministries or the institutions can do their job better. So we come on 3 o'clock, and Bongi and Cas, I want to thank you very, very much. You've addressed our questions, and we went through it so fast. I know that the people in the room who posed these questions a few days ago when we asked them are very pleased to hear them. And we've seen a lot of affirmation in the chat. So I thank you both very, very much for your time and your energy and being with us. And you can see the recording, of course. You don't need to see your own recording, Bongi and Cas, but for the audience, they can see their recording in YouTube by tomorrow. And there's an evaluation in the chat. Please fill it out so that we know for the audience what else we can do for you. For now, I want to thank you. I want to also thank our technical team, Michelle, Patrick, and a few others who are making this possible. Also our CEO, Amit Bawa, who of course always supports these events. So thank you, everyone, and I wish you a lovely good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
I didn't greet Amit, so.
He's not in the room, but he always does the recordings afterwards.
Oh, he looks at the recording.
No, he sent a message saying he can't be here. In the day, his diary is so bad, but.
He happens to be, his father late father and my late mother were brother and sister.
Really?
Yeah,
So you're cousins?
we cousins, first cousins.
Your first cousins. I should have known that. You see, I should have. That's not on the internet. So when I looked you up, I should have, now it's
No,
out
that's
there.
not on the internet.
Now it's out there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much
Cheers.
for this invite. Bye.
Thank you, Bongi. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.